Hi, third graders. We will be doing How to Eat Fried Worms, chapters 3 and 4. Review. So in chapter 4, what did Billy do to get ready to eat the worm? Well, if we go to the text, we can see that it says, there we go, that Billy was doing push-ups. So before he ate the worm, he was doing push-ups. The next question asks us, I didn't mean to stop sharing the screen. How was the worm cooked? If we go into our text, we can see that in chapter 4, the worm was boiled. So they boiled it. Tom and Joe boiled the worm. How did Tom convince Billy to eat the worm? Well, if we scroll down, we can see that it says, so Tom took Billy aside into the horse stall and put his arm around Billy's shoulder and talked to him about getting George Cunningham's brother's mini bike and how they could ride it on the trail under the power lines behind the O'Dell's farm and down the hills bouncing over rocks. So Tom took Billy aside into the horse stall and put his arm around Billy's shoulder and talked to him about George Cunningham's brother's mini bike. So that is how he convinced him. That was how Tom convinced Billy. How did Billy act after eating the first worm? Why did Billy act that way? Well, if we go into the chapter, so this part of it, Billy is acting. We can even use the illustration to see that Billy started flapping around and came to, come tell us how you're feeling. So he was flapping all around like a bird. And the other part of the question was, meant to clear that off. Why did Billy act that way? Well, if we go back up to the top, we can see that Billy was not happy with before they started because they chose for Billy to eat a night crawler. So Tom and Joe found a night crawler for Billy to eat, and Billy was not happy with that choice because it's a bigger worm. Whoa, what is the main conflict in the story? So the main conflict in the story is, so what is the main problem in the story? While we're thinking about this, readers, I want us to think back and listen to what in the beginning of the chapter, Billy, people were always daring him to do things. Let me see. So it says, but people were always, can't do it that way. Thought it was a highlighter. All right, I'll make the line smaller. But people were always daring him to do things, and he'd found it was better to look ahead to try to figure out things, get himself ready. So one of the main problems in the story is that Billy is always being dared to do things, and he always accepts those dares. Finally, let's go and look at our slides. And we're going back to our slides. It's context clues. Remember, one of the strategies that we learned as a reader was to use context clues. We look around the word. Look in the sentences before and after the clues that will help you infer. So when you're figuring out the meaning to an unknown word, we use context clues. One of the strategies that we talked about last week was to look in the sentences before and after the clue to help figure out the meaning of the word. So coax. If we look at it, it was in chapter 3, but half an hour later, as he was stubbornly dancing about outside in the moonlight to warm himself, Tom's dogs Martha had come along with 6 other dogs, all in a pack. And Billy had to coax them into the igloo and lock the door with an orange crate. After all, the dogs had stopped wrestling, nibbling, and barking and sniffing around. They'd all gone to sleep in a heap with Billy in the middle, as warm as an onion in stew. So, from what we just read, we can see that coax, if we look at the words coaxed, if we look at the words around him, Tom is locked the door and put all of the 6 dogs were in a pack, and he brought them in. So he was trying to persuade them to come in. When you coax somebody, you're trying to persuade them. Some synonyms for coaxed is sweet talk, charm, and a couple others. Now let's go into our summary. Now this is where you can pause the video after we go over it, and you get your your folder to write your summary. So the somebody was Billy. Billy wanted to get the mini bike from George Cunningham, but Al and Joe want him to eat Nightcrawler. So Billy began to act like a bird after eating the worm. Then Billy scared Alan and Joe. Finally, Alan and Joe went home. So go ahead, pause the video, and write your summary.